My Inner Knowing, empowering you to find your compass for the journey. We are dedicated to supporting you to rediscover and trust your natural ability to navigate life each day by sharing insight and experience through the lens of two professional communicators and their guests. We intend to prompt internal inquiry that supports all those willing to explore a unique path. Well, hello. Beat you to it.
You did. Well, hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm great.
Good.
Thanks. I feel good.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to having this conversation with you today.
But before we get started,
Yes.
I'm going to make the plug for people to support us here.
Yeah.
We need your help
Yeah.
by comments, by likes, and by sharing to get the word out. So
Yeah.
if you could take that extra step and give us a hand, we'd sure appreciate it. And we just thank you so much for listening.
Yeah. Thank you. So today I wanted to talk about the right to change our mind. So for me, what I remember was I was in my therapist's office 22 years ago, 23 years ago. And there was an Oprah magazine sitting there. And I don't know if it continued to be this way, but there used to be, like a one-page article inside the back cover where she spoke about something. And that particular one was something like, you have the right to change your mind. And I read it and I was like, what? I can change my mind? I didn't know I could change my mind. Like that changing my mind was wrong, bad, selfish, childish. And so it was really very, startling, really, to me to read that. And again, it's been a long time, but what I recall was you can't know everything you need to know at any particular time to make the best decision for yourself. That we're doing the best we can in any given moment to make the best decision for ourselves that we can. And so for me, trying to find that balance between having permission to change my mind, or that it's normal and natural to change our mind. And one of the other things that I had thought about was even changing preferences, like we talked about on one of the other podcasts about my dad and the German chocolate cake versus the lemon cake, right? Like maybe he hadn't had lemon cake before. Maybe, and I don't mean when he was 80, but I mean, like maybe German chocolate cake was what he had been exposed to, and it was the best of what he had available to him. And so German chocolate cake was what he chose until he had experiences that broadened his, view. I don't know. I have not sat down and analyzed my dad's choice about chocolate cake, but it just makes me think about like how we can get ourselves stuck in a certain way of being because we don't think that changing our mind is, again, mature or allowed or responsible or whatever story we attach to it. What are you thinking?
I'm thinking sometimes that what we think our choice is was really something that somebody else chose for us.
Yeah.
And we just adopted it. Maybe your dad never even asked for German chocolate cake, but that's what he got. And he's like, oh, that was really good. And then he got it every year for the next 70 freaking years.
Yeah.
Until one day he woke up and said, I'd like lemon since you asked me.
Yeah. It may be so. right?
And he may have thought German chocolate was his favorite, but I think I just find it interesting. We can not only believe what our own choice was, but maybe it wasn't even our choice.
Yeah, maybe not. Yes, it's interesting. There's a lot of emotion coming up in that for you. What else is coming up for you?
Well, what's coming up is just thinking about, that's a cake choice.
Yeah.
But what about, when you talk about shame or childish,
Yeah.
it strikes me that I want to go back to those hazy days of yesteryear, 22 years ago, when you're in your therapist's office. And what was it that was so shocking about choice? What was the choice that was coming to mind that would bring out childish and shame? Because I'm guessing your dad didn't have shame over lemon versus German chocolate.
Well, if he does, I don't know about it.
Sure.
Sure. Wow, that's a really good question. I don't know. Maybe I was still working through shame of my divorce. That's possible. I'm trying to go back to that period of time. I'm trying to think where I was. I mean, it's interesting that you ask, because I do think about when I made that choice. I remember getting a card from my grandma, my dad's mom, and I don't remember exactly what it said, but basically that she didn't approve, in that if he was hitting me with a baseball bat, then that would be a reason for me to go. Otherwise, I shouldn't go. And I remember reading that and what? I don't even know what to do with that. And I remember reading it a few times and just trying to understand her perspective and where she was coming from. And I couldn't really understand. You have to wait until someone harms you like that to decide that something's not okay for you, that it's harming you. That, I didn't understand that part. But it doesn't mean that I still wasn't working through the choice that I made. In my family at the time, I believe, the only person that had gotten a divorce that didn't have an annulment. And so I remember my mom presenting me with that information, talking about the role of that, in the Catholic Church. And I mean, while it was a term that I heard, it wasn't something that I really knew or understood. And it may be different now than it was, back then. But for me, that process was about going in front of a group of people and not telling them that I had changed my mind, that I knew more about myself, that I knew more about what I needed, that I knew more about what was harmful to me. There was just so much more I knew at that point. And so it wasn't about that. It was about going in front of this group of people and explaining to them why my marriage never existed. And I couldn't do that. It didn't make sense to me. It just made sense to me that I had grown and I knew more about myself.
Sure.
And I remember, after the divorce, one weekend when I didn't have the kids and I was going through boxes, that I came across a journal that I wrote in when I was dating, when I was a teenager. And I remember just this strong emotion coming over me as I'm reading that. And I'm realizing that all of the reasons that I was getting a divorce were things I knew before I even got married, that I struggled with. But I didn't know how to value them. I didn't know what they meant. I didn't know what they looked like long term. I didn't know. And it was so shocking to me to see that and to know that I had known it on some level, but I didn't know how to to value myself or it at the time. We went to therapy. I think like 4 different therapists over 6 years, in our 20s. And I just didn't feel like we got anywhere. I think he was the easy target. I presented to put together. I presented to sure of myself. I presented to, competent. He was quiet. It was harder for him to find the words that he wanted to say. He would shut down. And so it was just easy for the focus to be more on him.
Sure.
Than on us as a couple. And I'm not saying that it would have changed the result. I'm just aware as a therapist now, looking back, how helpful that wasn't really to the process.
Sorry, it's an interesting way of saying it. How helpful that wasn't.
It wasn't. It wasn't. Yeah, because it didn't teach me anything.
Sure. Or him.
Yeah. And so then getting married, getting divorced and then getting married and then having some of the same problems arise. And I feel fortunate enough that I was like, I have to have responsibility in here somewhere because I'm married to somebody who is completely different than my first husband, but I'm having similar problems. And so that therapist's office, I still remember her name was Janice Cook. I don't think she's alive anymore. She was down on the plaza and we were doing EMDR about some reactions that I was having to my husband, how he would like engage with me when he was struggling and I would have like this reaction. And so we were doing EMDR and I remember, oh my goodness, I remember Janice, we're working on what's called a negative cognition that's connected to whatever your, trauma is. And I was having a hard time picking that I had a negative cognition and the list is a long one, but I was very well protected. And I remember her saying, well, I think that one of your negative cognitions is, I'm not important. And I was like, I don't think so.
Sure.
I don't think so. Nope. I think I'm important. And she's like, no, I think you are because I think that's how you protect yourself. But I don't actually think that you think you are. And she wrote it down on a card and she sent it home with me too.
Was that a moment or like she doesn't know what she's fucking talking about?
I probably, though I wouldn't have used those words back then, but yes. I would.
Well, I guess you set a bad example for me with this podcast.
Yeah. But it was, Bleep. I mean, it was, it was really interesting, to me to, like I had some level of awareness that I had a right to change my mind because I had changed my mind, right? Before I read that article. But I think it was like the article was like, you have permission to change your mind. You don't always know what is going to be good or healthy for you until you step in. And, and this isn't anything about saying that we should be willy-nilly about relationships because I don't believe that. I believe we both have a responsibility if we're going to be in relationship to work on having healthy relationship.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the boundaries.
Yeah. So. Yeah. No, I think we do have responsibility if we're going to step into a relationship to put effort into having the healthiest one that we can, whether that's therapy or reading books or trying exercises or going on retreat or whatever. But I don't think most of us know what healthy relationship looks like. I don't think we have a lot of good models for sure. But going back to that right to change our mind, I've over the years just worked on, implementing that into all areas of my life. But it was something where I just felt like I was responsible to always say yes to a request and to do it to completion, even if it's something that took from me. And not in a little way, I mean in a big way.
Tell me more.
When I think about even like owning a business, there's a lot of responsibility that can come in that process of trying to do it well. And I don't do it all well. There are certain aspects, I believe, of running a business I do well, but there's a lot that I don't do well. And my like when I hire someone, and I fortunately haven't had to do this often, like there's still that part of me that is like, trust my instinct about that person and give them a lot of grace. And what I'll realize sometimes is that I'm not trusting my own knowing. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about it. I'm not really living so much anymore. I'm in this constant problem-solving mode. So impacting sleep, impacting focus, impacting self-care. And so it's really taking from me, but then still feeling like this sense of responsibility but I like that person, they have a lot of potential. I can see the things in them that are good and that I like, but ultimately it's harming me. And in some cases, a client. And then making that decision is hard. And I get to change my mind. I get to decide that whatever I decided then is no longer true for me now, and that it's not helping anybody. And it's still hard.
Sure. No, it's interesting, the different contexts of changing your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Marriage to me is on a whole different level than an employer-employee relationship.
Yeah.
And it's not that I treat that carelessly.
Yeah.
As you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've went a decade without ever, or 12 years without ever terminating someone's employment, and then went through a string of them.
Yeah.
And so that decision-making has sped up, but it's still difficult, because there are hesitations, wanting people to be able to rise to the occasion, be their best, those sorts of things. And so I think there are ties and parameters, but ultimately I know, I can make those choices.
Yeah.
I think family relationship and marriage are like a whole different.
Sure.
And that's just, I don't know what's driving that observation, but, or, your love partnership, whether it's marriage or not, there's can be a whole religious overlay like you were describing in your past.
Sure.
And I think there's some wisdom behind that viewpoint. Is it right-minded? In my opinion, ultimately, never, unless they're beating you with a baseball bat. Absolutely not. But helping people recognize the significance of, and you can help us out with this. It's like, how do you determine the parameters in that scenario? Because it can't just be soup of the day.
Sure.
And I don't think it's healthy for us as individuals to have those sorts of relationships, whether it's, with family members or lovers or whatever it is, just be soup of the day.
Sure.
But also you go too far and then it's harmful. how far is too far and how far is not enough is the question that comes to mind. It's hard.
Sure. Well, for me, what I feel like is the soup of the day is what trains me to make decisions in regards to bigger aspects of my life, right? Because how do we learn who we are and what we really want unless we're practicing, right? I mean, I think about like earlier on in our relationship when it was harder for you to pick something out that you wanted and you wanted like feedback from me, about, did I like these shoes or something? And I'd be like, and you really wanted feedback, right? Because your clothes had been picked by somebody else, right? And so you weren't used to buying all the things you wanted.
Right.
And so to me, like that, you practicing choosing what you want, even if it's in regards to clothes and shoes, still teaches you what you value and what you want and what's interesting to you, and an opportunity for us to learn about ourselves. I think, in marriage, again, and I've talked about this before, I stepped into a role. I wasn't making conscious choice about anything. I mean, I thought I was.
This is way back when you were a kid.
Well, when I was in my young to mid 20s.
22,
yeah.
23.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm sure I did again, when I got married at 30 or whatever. I'm sure I did then too. But I don't know that it was a different role because I was just trying to not do what I did the first time. I was trying to learn more, but I don't think I was thoughtful. I don't think I was understanding until I started therapy in my second marriage. I really don't. I think I just stepped in and did things and just did them until I couldn't do them anymore.
Once you were a quivering pile of jelly on the floor, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what came...
You talk about capacity for pain.
Yeah. I mean, I can't remember if we talked about this, but it seems like we did. When I was listening to the David Cook song, Come Back to Me, and even though I think it's about, relationship, and I would listen to that and I would cry and cry and cry. And I was like, whew, what is this bringing up in me? Right. Then I realized it was about me talking to me, like I don't even know. Right. Come back to myself. I don't even know who I am anymore. So I don't think I was, even once I saw that you have the right to change your mind, I still don't think I was living that way. Maybe I don't even today. I think I try. I think I keep trying to learn to be aware of the choices that I'm making, but I don't think I always do it well. So, but I think as best we can do to practice, why am I making this choice? I go back to that, asking ourselves questions, right? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I choosing this? Not just, ooh, that's so cool. Well, why is it cool to you? And I know that my kids can get irritated about that sometimes when I say, why are you doing what you're doing? But I also want them to know, because I don't ever remember anybody ever asking me, why are you choosing that? I mostly got, don't choose that or choose that. Not, why. So for me, whether we're changing our mind around a big thing in our life, a career change, right? Or a relationship change, or moving to another state. I mean, that's a huge choice that people make all the time that oftentimes doesn't go very well because they're not thinking about why they're doing what they're doing. It just feels right? Or it feels exciting, or it feels whatever. People will like go on a place on vacation and then they're like, I'm going to move there, right? When they don't really have any sense of what it's like to live there. It just feels good to be there. So
that raises an interesting question. I've got a bunch of questions for you.
Yes.
And I'm going to get lost. So, because you know how I do. If your inner knowing is telling you for the people that go someplace and want to live there, and it feels good, feels good in their body. And it's like, yeah. Mm-hmm. So how do you know to trust your inner knowing in that situation versus, if you've trusted it in other decisions, but now you've got one of those big ones like moving to a whole new state.
Yeah.
What's the difference? When do you say, wait a minute, inner knowing? We've got to have some discernment here.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say when I think about the people that I have worked with over the years who have made a choice like to move to another state and their awareness after the fact, right? Because that's typically when it's happening.
Sure.
A lot of it is loss of community. They didn't recognize that they were going to feel so isolated. They didn't recognize, interestingly, the political climate of the community they were moving into that didn't feel like they had a place there. Not feeling like they could build new relationships with, healthcare professionals that felt like it was. And some of this is because it's new, right? And we like familiar.
Right. No, it's interesting.
Yeah. Lack of being able to build new friendships. Like they thought that they could just, get involved in activities and those relationships would build. Or that if their children were still like school age kids, that those relationships would develop.
Sure. That's a whole extra layer of complication.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I think it's so many things. I mean, I don't think it's, consistent, except I think that if they had community and they left because they liked that place, right? And it felt good. And then they can't recreate that. There's a lot of loss,
Sure.
a lot of grieving that comes with that people don't anticipate. And, I think about, when we live in a place, but we don't consciously choose to be here, we just are here because this is where we were born. We can really not have an experience of where we live because we just live here. And it makes me think about when we went on our office retreat in April. And I love it how one of my employees, Bree, she always finds these things, for us to do and places to eat. And and it was great because we stayed in Kansas City. And I was like, this is great, just not even knowing where I live because I've lived here my whole life. And so even just seeing a place from somebody else's perspective, can be really helpful. I think we can lose perspective of where we are no matter where we are. You know how much I love Oregon, and I remember when we were visiting there once, I said something to a woman that lives there, and she's like, about how beautiful it is and the things that I love about it. And she was like, oh my God, thank you so much for helping me see what I don't see anymore. Mm. And I was like, you don't see this? Mm-hmm. You don't see this? She's like, no, I don't. But I do now. Thank you. And I was like, fascinating. But isn't that what we do, right? If we're not living intentionally, we aren't very aware of where we are, no matter where we are. So, is that helpful?
Well, just having the discussion is helpful. Learning the difference between real inner knowing and emotional response?
Well, this is interesting because it makes me think about the intuition piece we were talking about earlier, right? I mean, earlier today, not on this podcast. It makes me go back to the conversation that we had in the do I trust myself, right? Where you were talking about your case and how dysregulated you were. And we were talking about like how did the intuition eventually win out, right?
Right.
Because you practiced.
Right.
Right. Because you have been intentionally learning about yourself and who you are and what you value and what you want. And in that particular scenario, the information in the case, right? I mean, because you could have had a lot of experiences, but if you didn't actually have the data, it wouldn't have gotten you where you got in that case, right? So, but I do think it's that the practicing of it that I think is the best that we can do is just to keep practicing.
Sure. Well, there's that journey again.
Yeah, it is.
And sometimes, another thought I had was when we make a choice, and then because change, takes us out of our environment, and there's a grieving process that you were describing of people that have moved, et cetera. And I think, then it becomes another choice, which is that what's going on? And I just need to, work through this and give my choice an opportunity, or, I made a bad choice. I need to cut my losses and go now.
Yeah. Oh, such a great point.
All those life decisions.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, if you have the opportunity for you to, experience your choice without a lot of consequence, that would be ideal, right? I can step into this choice. I can learn from this choice and the consequence of stepping out of this choice. Let's say we give it a year and we're like, wow, I've learned a lot about myself and I don't think this is the right choice for me. I look at the way we have jobs today, right? Very different than how they used to be. And I'm not saying people still don't stay in jobs for 30 or 40 years. I think they do. But I think it is much more common for people to step into a company and be like, ooh, this is not a good fit for me.
Right.
I don't feel like I'm losing myself in this place. This environment, for whatever reason, does not work for me. So I think if we have that option, why would we not take it? And again, with this intention of learning about ourselves in the process, I just think is important if we're going to make choices that ultimately bring us more peace and freedom.
Sure. Well, I think one last thought on that is just, it's certainly easier if there weren't children involved and you go move and you can sell that house and move back or do whatever it is that you want to do when you don't have other people whose lives are being impacted by your experiment.
Right.
But that's not typically, it's not usually that clean.
Well, no. And for me, it's like, do we just keep doing what we've always done or do we try to figure out how to do it differently? Right.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah. I think about, like how I've raised my children. And again, I'm not saying this works for everybody, but so far, one of the things that I would tell my children is, please consider waiting to get married until you're 26 or older. Go out and explore the world, figure out what you want to do and who you are and what you like. And, as best you can, take your time and experiment before you do all of those things. But for me, when I was growing up, there was an expectation that I found a man and I got married.
Sure.
And I had children and, did all the things. I did all the things. I didn't know who I was, not even a little bit, not even a little bit. So for me, it's like, how do we change the dynamic, right? What I am hopeful for my children is that because of the way that I have parented them, that they are making more intentional choices about their life, that they're not just doing what they think they should be doing. And that, like I think about, Luke going to medical school and me not becoming attached to his choice to go to medical school, right? Like, just go to college, take classes, see what you like, right? I don't want him to make a life choice because of my reaction to something. Like, go do that and, go explore and see what you like, and then he comes back this year and he's like, I am not going to go to medical school. I don't think that that's what I want to do. I don't think that's what I want for my life. Now I'm a junior in college and I've worked for a doctor for a year. And now I'm like, ooh, that is really not what I want, right? Taking the time, being intentional, going out and exploring what's out there, stepping in. I mean, him being able to be a doctor's personal assistant for a year has been really helpful for him. And I don't think it's that simple, but it has exposed him to things that he couldn't have known or gotten clear about otherwise, right? So for me, is it possible that we can change the story or the expectations so that I don't know. I wish school could just be an experiment. Can't school just be an experiment where we learn about ourselves and figure out what we are good at and not good at, and, have the opportunity to strengthen things that we're not so good at, I mean, I don't know.
I think that's an ideal, it's something that is, I think it's a good idea.
Which my oldest son, right, a few months before he was supposed to start college, comes to me very tearfully and says, I'm not ready to go to college. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was hard because in my mind, you didn't do anything other than that. Like, right. You graduate from high school, you go to college. That's what you do. And so fortunately for me and for him, I think I handled it well and was like, yeah, I don't want you to go to college if you don't feel like you'll be successful at college. And it was interesting because when parents would ask me, what's he doing, blah, blah, blah. And I'd say, well, he's not going to go. He doesn't feel like he's ready. And how many parents said to me, well, thank God you didn't spend that tuition money for someone who didn't feel like they were ready to go.
Sure.
Which wasn't in my mind, but I was like, oh yeah, that is a good thing that I didn't spend tuition money on something he wasn't ready to do. But I did have to change my story about that.
As did he, yeah.
As did he, right? And he did. And then, he worked for 5 years and took some classes and figured out more about himself and what level of responsibility did he want directly for a human's life. And he's still being helpful, like being in a helping profession, but in the way that felt good for him. And he got clear and then went to school for college at 23 because he felt like he knew more about himself and the direction he wanted to go. And I just don't think we allow space for that.
Oh, no. And I mean, I've just seen it with your other, your second son too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And with your third.
Yeah.
and it's so foreign from my experience growing up in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And that may be just a function of my family or could have been a function of the time or both, I suppose. But, and it could just be me.
Yeah.
But it's not something I've seen where people are able to make those choices for themselves and not have to live up to the expectations or the story of the parent. And I know it's not that simple because I think there were expectations for your third son with medical school, et cetera, from some family. Mm-hmm. But you've given them this strength to be able to make decisions.
And change their mind.
Yeah, and change their mind.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question.
Yes.
What is the line between making decisions that you know will make the people that you're in relationship, whether it's parents or a love relationship or whatever, make them happy versus decisions that you make about you? I mean, should every decision be made about this is what's best for me? How do we draw that line?
Yeah. Well, of course, a very complex conversation.
Yes, that is a big curveball I just threw you.
You know, babe, for me, there's what I've learned, for myself is that there's a balance that I have to find for myself. And I think we're all very different in our decision making and where we go first. For me, I naturally go to other people's care and concern first. And so for me, learning that I could choose myself, I think is still difficult. I think I still work on that. And then I think there's people who think about themselves first, who would who could benefit they and their relationships could benefit by them learning to consider others as well. I think it's being able to be thoughtful in our decisions. Again, conscious, taking into context, gathering information, but then ultimately, does the decision that we're making, is it harmful to us? Is it taking from us? Is it requiring us to mask up? I mean, for some people, is it killing us? And so I don't think the answer is simple. I think, again, it requires us to learn a lot about ourselves and to be in relationship with people who we can have really authentic conversations with. Truly.
Sure. I'm smiling.
Yeah. Because we lie to ourselves, right? All the time.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and we can rationalize things really well. And so again, I think we have to, if we want to continue to grow in this path of being healthy and knowing ourselves, surrounding ourselves with people who, can be curious with us in a non-shaming way, really trying to help us think about why we think a certain way. And can we consider that there is another option or, 15 other options? Yeah. Allowing, trying to figure out what is the story really about? Is this choice that I'm making, might it harm people? Yes. And sometimes my choices are going to harm people. But if I recognize that by not making the choice, I am harming myself, and I don't mean uncomfortable. I don't mean I don't like it. I mean, it's harming me. It is reinforcing something in me that is harmful to me. To me, that's different.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
What's coming to mind is like if you listen to Abraham Hicks, she talks about your guidance system. And if you're, if you're feeling happy and energetic and those sorts of things, then, you're in flow. And if you're not, that your guidance system is telling you, you need to change your viewpoint, change your perception. And I know there's a lot more to it than that she's teaching, but what I think is that in the bigger decisions, that can't just be, there's a difference between our intuition and our knowing and maybe just an emotion or a feeling in the moment.
Sure.
Right. Or that. Sure. And so what I'm trying to put together is that, maybe if you're looking at it as patterns.
Yes.
Right. That is, to me, in this moment, feels like it has more integrity.
Yes.
In all kinds of ways.
Right.
Right. Because just because I get in an argument with you and I'm angry, you hurt my feelings doesn't mean, well, let's just throw the whole thing down the, down and wash it down the drain.
Right.
But I think looking at patterns and, it's fascinating, but I do think, and maybe pattern isn't the right word, but it may be. You use patterns a lot.
I do. I use patterns a lot.
And if we look at our own patterns, if we can step out and see that in ourselves, that maybe it helps us have more discernment or non-emotional, intentional decision making.
Yeah.
And then I think maybe at that point, if you come back and look for that inner knowing, that it's a deeper inner knowing, you know what I'm saying? It's really fascinating, this conversation to me.
Yeah.
But what I like about it is I've been going through this process of thinking about how society used to teach virtues. And it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of that. And I feel like my keel's not down on virtues. And a lot of what I think virtues are is driven by, wrong thinking of the people in my past, et cetera. Just that viewpoint, like the religious viewpoint that your family was providing you. Well, you need to be beaten with a bat before it's okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think there's some tying together of those for me. Or a thought process that I want to move in that direction. So I'm living with integrity and honesty and loyalty and, all those things. But loyalty doesn't mean just loyalty to whatever I want in the moment.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what you were saying about that, that deeper issue, which is this harming me? And if you're harming yourself to that degree, and I've been there, as you know, and if you're harming yourself to that degree, you're harming everybody around you, even though you think that it's out of loyalty to a decision that you made in the past. And I'm talking about the relationship with my spouse, my ex-wife. It had just evolved to the point that I didn't want to be around.
Right.
That wasn't helpful to anybody.
No.
Not her.
No.
Not anybody's soul, not my daughter, not me. And so if, just interesting in having this discussion, looking at as how do you balance out those concepts of virtue with growth and harm and those sorts of concepts.
Yeah.
Whew. This is a big one.
It is. Yeah. I think we all have a different definition of everything, even though we have a nice dictionary that
well, sure,
defines things, right? And even if we think similarly, the context, the nuance of things, we don't. It's interesting. I mean, I'm glad you brought up patterns, because I do think if we look at our patterns, it can really be helpful for us to learn about ourselves. Like, let's say if I look back at over the last 30 years, 40 years, so let's say since I was 16, how about that? And I looked at my relationships, with people, like dating relationships, no matter who I was dating, and I didn't actually date very much, which is interesting in and of itself. I was trying to make a relationship with every person. Like, I wasn't in relationship like, is this person somebody that's a good fit for me? It was, oh, I like somebody. Let's see if I can make a relationship work with them, right? Very different lens. And so I could see that pattern, of mine in the, 5 or 6 people that I have dated in my lifetime, because it hasn't, again, been very many.
I feel so much better. I've never asked you that question.
You.
I know, I'm completely teasing. But.
I know. But I can look at the pattern and I can see I was always trying to make the relationship work. Right. And I remember this one guy I dated and And why I decided to not date him was because, to continue dating him was because the first time I went over to his house and I met his mom, and, he's giving me a tour of the house. And on his bedroom door, his mom had taped an envelope that said, here's your car payment money or something written on the envelope. And I was like, what's that? And he said something about that he didn't use any of his own money to make his car payment, that his mom made his car payment. And I was like, you are no longer an option. Isn't that funny? I don't know. I was probably 18 or 19. So it must have been 18.
Well, you probably missed out on the trust fund.
Anyway, it was just interesting, right?
Or avoided becoming the trust fund. Which was it? I don't know.
But anyway, it was interesting. When I think back, something in me said, nope. Mm-hmm. So just trying to recognize my patterns, if I look back and I could see that I had been in, 65 relationships. Well, what would that pattern be about for me? There would be information for me to learn if I can look back and look at my pattern and what was I trying to accomplish? Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it would give insight.
Sure.
If we all did an analysis that way, and it's not easy to sit down with your journal, and think about those things. But if you did, how is it that I make my decisions?
Right. Yes.
And if it's always based on somebody else or what I can do to make them happy or successful or whatever it is, then it tells you something.
Yeah.
Or based on X, Y, Z, if it's always about me.
Right.
Regardless of everybody else. Right. Well, that's an eye opener too.
Right. Fuck all y'all. Right. All the time. Every
time.
Oh,
right? I do that. If you do, and you're at this point where you're growing,
right,
it would be helpful to see that pattern. And it would also, I think, give, more insight into your actual knowing.
Absolutely. Because I do think it's something we develop. I think that we have some awareness of our body, but we're so trained out of it, like we've talked about. And I think it is this very intentional process of getting back in our body. What messages does our body give us? How do we value it? Because we don't often value the messages that it gives correctly.
Right.
And I say this, it's really our wanting, right? I will say my wanting can be strong. Right. That does not mean that is intuition or knowing. It's a wanting. So not the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What?
No, what a great conversation, but we're going to have to pick it up and finish it. But boy, that one could get picked up for years, I think. There's a lot of learning to be done around that.
Yeah.
Nice topic, babe.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, babe.
Mm-hmm.
And again, not to minimize any decision in our life. How much we listeners believe how complex we are. We're just sharing our process as best as we were able today. But to me, it is a practice, learning why we do what we do. And we have the right to change our mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think for me in this space, finding integrity and making that in changing my mind about things is really important.
Yeah.
But that's just my point in the journey. Other people will have other motivators.
Well, I do think, I talk to clients about that all the time. I want you to have integrity in your choice. I want it to be something that you feel clear about, not reactive about.
Right.
Not just from a feeling. Look at the patterns. But at the end of the day, what I want for you is the least amount of regret as possible. I want you to feel integrity in your choice.
Yeah. Least amount of regret and most opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Thanks, babe.
Thank you. I love you.
I love you too. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to explore life with you. We encourage curiosity, self growth, and we strive to be more compassionate every day.